Alright everyone, it's time for some weird news again. I've decided to branch out beyond just like the straight-laced news and reporting on political analytics and polls and shit like that. It's fun, it's amusing to me, but I also want to get into some of this other stuff, like the cattle mutilations in Texas last week. This is about a starvation cult that has cropped up in Kenya. It's called the Good News International Church. It's led by a man named Paul McKenzie. And it's a pretty standard cult, some hundreds of members. Actually, it could be larger than that. As far as the people that don't take part in the core cult activities, it seems that there are some dissidents at the moment. You see, Paul McKenzie went from just basically grifting off of people and saying, hey, I can talk to God, and help you get into heaven, and you have standard services, and maybe you speak in tongues once in a while, and then, you get millions of dollars donated to you by a parishioner who has decided that you are the Christ incarnate, and sells everything that they own to give to you instead of to give to the poor, and it's standard cult grifting behavior. But then, at some point, God told him that people should fast for excessive periods of time in order to go to heaven. If they literally starve themselves to death, then they'll achieve salvation. See, the problem is, when you tell your parishioners, and this appears to be what was explicitly said, hey, don't worry if you do die of starvation while doing this week-long fast. Doesn't matter because you automatically go to heaven. Not really commanding them to starve themselves, now are you? This is, again, cult behavior, plausible deniability. That's not what I said. I didn't tell them to starve themselves. I said, don't worry, I don't think you'll starve, but if you do, you go to heaven. I was just trying to make them feel better about fasting and shit. There's a little bit of a legal workaround, and in a nation like Kenya, it'd probably work with their outsized focus on public religious displays. But anyway, now dozens of people are dead, and hundreds of others are missing in action, like they're probably dead out in the bushes somewhere. So this is a Jim Jones level suicide cult at this point. We're not talking about three people misinterpreted the pastor's message. I would also like to point out that Paul McKenzie is fundamentally like Jim Jones in another way. This is a historical bit that you almost never hear. I like it when Razorfist points it out and people act bemused as though he was wrong, but he is historically correct. If you listen to the People's Temple suicide tape, you will understand this for yourself. Jim Jones was a commie. He was engaged in political terrorism. That's basically what happened down in Guyana. He was a commie. When it came to the last days, when the government was breathing down their neck because they were involved in political assassinations, quite literally, what did Jim Jones attempt to do? And he told his parishioners this less than an hour before they drank the Kool-Aid. Oh, well, we tried to talk to the Soviets. They can't do anything for us. They had assured us before that they would. See, we're all going to die. We must give ourselves to God and not be afraid and all that. Basically, all kill yourselves, and most of them did. It's amazing the proportion of people, by the way, there that actually did that, including feeding it to their own fucking kids and killing them as well. Very interesting. He was a commie. Paul McKenzie has indicated some commie beliefs too. It's interesting how religion is so often used as a cloak for subversive political movements. Or social movements, or just grifters in general. I could name more than one content creator who the money started drawing up from trying to do pickup artist things or other degenerate acts, and they got too old to do it anymore, or they got deplatformed for misogyny, and so they decided to become a reformed Christian tradcon. There are several of these grifters out there. You know at least a couple of whom I'm talking about. This dude's a commie too, indicating that he takes up a line from Al-Qaeda and groups like that the USA is literally Satan. There's a lot of people in the U.S. that certainly think the U.S. government is Satan. I wouldn't be unamenable to the basic concept, but that particular terminology definitely has East Bloc connotations, and he's a Christian, not a Muslim, so it's not coming from actual Al-Qaeda ideology. It probably came from China or something like that. Oh, interesting movement. When you kill off your parishioners, of course, the general tendency is that you lose money doing that. Unless, of course, you've already had them will you everything when they die, which seems to be part of the reason for this. Anyway, I think the dude's in custody. They were forced out of the area. They were in a town called Malindi for a long time. They had to move elsewhere because of their various problems. I wonder why they would possibly have problems with the local authorities, by the way. It's sort of like that video from years ago where the pastor was having his congregation eat grass randomly. And they were out there pretending that the grass was like the tastiest thing ever, like literally grazing like cows and shit like that. And people crying and clapping. And religion can make people do weird stuff. Now, to be clear, the Christian religion is not what caused this. I'm aware of that fact. I'm not going Laytips Fedora mode or anything like that. This is communism, actually. Communism and starvation go hand in hand. That's another way to tell that this is a leftoid in disguise. But that's the veil, the veneer. Like the Taliban uses Islam as a veneer in order to abuse people. Certainly groups like Al-Qaeda and fucking ISIS. There are Christian groups that do this. Look at the Catholic Church. You know, what's the facade of religion is used to entice young boys, by priests sometimes. Well, don't worry, it's a holy act. Don't worry, I've never slept with a woman or anything like that, unless you count those prostitutes over down the street, but we won't talk about that too much now. Bend over, kid, and help your priest. Don't talk back to me, or else Jesus will be mad and he'll go to hell, you sinner. I hate to say it, but, when you've got an old dude around 10-year-old boys, that con game apparently works more often than not. I'll tell your parents you disrespected the priest. They're old Catholic people. They're going to beat the shit out of you. This happens in all religions, by the way. Yeah, so a starvation cult, killing off your own parishioners. Again, I have a feeling that there are some wills that are not going to actually be honored in the end because there's going to be a mass murder case. I'm wondering how many, in the end, people will actually die from this. Because with Jim Jones, I think wasn't about 1,000 people. So there's quite a bit to go before you can catch up. I don't even know that their congregation is as big as the number of people just who died at the People's Temple. Unfortunately, it'll probably be in the several hundreds range. So that's a considerable, it's going to have its own page in Wikipedia, I suppose, for what decreasingly little Wikipedia articles are generally worth, by the way. I'm assuming that's going to be there, and it will, much like with Jim Jones, it will downplay any political entanglements that we all know exactly what form they would take if they were explored. When you're calling us the Great Satan, and then you're telling your congregation that starvation is a good thing, again, you line right up with that Soviet mentality. Starvation and communism will always be twain. In fact, I think the commies overall in the last 100 years may have starved more people to death, deliberately and inadvertently, than they ever shot or stabbed. I think that the famine side of it is actually the number one reason for the deaths. Not that they didn't also execute more people than goddamn Hitler did, but, on top of that. That's about all. Peace out.